Hey traders, Cousin Benny coming to you on September the 8th, 2013 with a weekly market read and hopefully a watch list of stocks to look at for the upcoming week. The economic calendar for this week, you can see here a few things. University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index is on Friday, and we have weekly jobless claims on Thursday, the import price index, and we have the business index on Tuesday. We also have Obama speaking on Tuesday. So looking at the S&P 500, we see that head and shoulders that I was anticipating last week. We have this trend line going back to November that we also put in a pivot on in June. So we're grinding up against that currently with the 10 period moving average headed down as well as the 30 period. If you follow the 20 and the 50, you have a similar scenario. We have a possible neckline along this level here at 1550, and then we have this possible sloping trend line if this moves back up and puts in a right shoulder and moves down. So it's hard to anticipate what's going to happen, what the catalyst might be, but for the time being I'm looking at this a little bit weaker than we were in July, where we had this 6-month uptrend. We failed, got down below the 10 and the 30, quickly got back up, and again failed within a month's time, 6 weeks time, on this crossover right here. Okay, so currently I'm looking for a red candle on Monday, or a move higher and taking out this 30 period moving average and continuing to move higher, and an upward sloping wedge, if you will, if you connected these tops with the trend line here. Okay, so let's look at some other indicators. Oh, before I leave this chart, noting that the ADX got back down below 25. Remember, we're trending here when ADX is down below 25, and you can see the market pretty much moving sideways for the most part while ADX is down below 25. So if this quickly turns back up and the trend resumes downward, then we'll take another look at this next week. Let's look at the put-call ratio, which we can see we're down below the 50 period moving average. We popped up into a sell zone on the PPO and also a sell zone down here on the CPCE put-call ratio. We got down to, let's see, 50%. So that's where we are currently right now as of the close on Friday. Advanced decline, not much to see here. We had a spike up a couple of weeks ago. We have yet to see a corresponding move higher on the advanced decline on the green side. We haven't seen a 90% up day on advanced decline volume, so we don't see any accumulation days yet. So we'll keep an eye on this chart going into the week as well if there's any changes. ADX we already looked at. Bullish percent, we continue to move lower. I'd like to see this down below 70, 65 in this area before I start taking any larger risk than I already am taking. The NYMO, McClellan, we are bouncing around here around the zero line, which doesn't really give you a whole lot to work off of. What you want to see is extremes. We're not up above 50 or 60, and we're not down below minus 100. So again, this is what I was mentioning earlier about 6 months of an uptrend. We failed here at this crossover, quickly got back up to overbought territory, failed again, had a crossover. Now we're sitting inside of this box setup zone between the 10 period and the 30 period moving averages. Do note the volume here. So there's really not much to trade off of on the NYMO. Stocks below the 50, we had a bounce down here, had a nice signal approaching the 30 range. We're at 32, I believe, and then we bounced, which is where we saw this move here. So short term, that looks pretty good. The trend, the ARMS index, we want to see capitulative volume. We didn't see that to the downside. We saw a little spike here last week before last, and we got the spike up to above the 2.0 line, which is what you want to see for a bounce. And we got something of a bounce, but it really wasn't that great. A little bit tepid from my perspective. So we have these trend lines that connect these lows here a little bit higher than these lows down from November and June. So we could get back up and test that area and still not make it up to these highs and fail. Or we could just continue to move higher depending on what happens. So the XII, I added this list of the stocks and their weighting in the institutional index, the New York Stock Exchange, ARCA. And I've gone over this before. If you follow me, you know that I look at this stock, this index, and all of the stocks that are in there. We'll go over that in a second, but here's that box setup I was talking about. I want to see it move lower or blast out of here to get long on this index as well. We are approaching overbought on stochastics, and RSI is down below 50. The MACD histogram it did cross the zero line last week. We're not seeing a whole lot of momentum here, so keep an eye on this as well. Let's take a look at the ARCA summary. We can see, let's take a look at the candle glance first. And taking a look at this, we can see Apple is above its 20 period. It hasn't put in a new high. Some of these others, you can see some gold stocks here, Amgen, Amazon. I noted that some of the bank stocks were looking better. Let's activate RSI so that we can talk about that. You can see RSI, many of these stocks are down below 50, and some of them have turned down from being above 70. So keep an eye on your RSI. Some of the banks are making it back above 50, notably GS, which Sunrise Trader took a trade on last week. We have the Bank of Scotland here, had a nice move above 50. We have Citigroup turned at 50. You can see Caterpillar. Some of the energy stocks did well. ConocoPhillips is it bounced off of 50 and moving higher. CVS, CVX, DuPont Chemical hit 50 and is rejected there. So let's look at the second list. This is where some of those stocks like Goldman Sachs is here, pulling off of the lower 30 level and pushing back towards 50. We'll look this week to see what happens at the 50 level. Hewlett-Packard very weak, down at 30. JP Morgan is a bit stronger. Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, Lilly. You can see a candle glance of these 75 stocks really gives you a good sense of where the market's heading and what sectors are doing well. PepsiCo, you can see another energy stock. Occidental, Procter & Gamble. Consumer staples not doing that great. Royal Bank of Canada, nice pop here, approaching 70. And there was another Canadian stock here. Where'd it go? Canadian Bank, I should say. Maybe it's the next page. Schlumberger, Simon Properties down here, fairly weak, double bottom. We can see it's pushing off of 30. Keep an eye on that. Suncor's looking decent. Energy stock going back up to 70. AT&T and Verizon. You would think Verizon would look better considering they bought, was it Vodafone last week? I guess they want to get into the internet side of things. Union Pacific, UPS. So you can see these stocks rounding off some of the big retailers as well. looking fairly weak. Target, let's take a look at Target. Noting that one was very weak. Down below the 50, the green shaded area. On balance volume, you can see this gave you a good clear indication that we peaked and rolled over. We had a crossover on the 1030, so you had a box set up here that really didn't trigger a short, except if you looked at these two green candles here that bounced off of the 10 period and moved off of that. You could have got this short perhaps, but I didn't get it. Note where RSI is. This is really oversold, so I don't know what the news was, but it apparently wasn't well received. We had a huge volume, and then of course on balance volume hit these lows. Looking at the NASDAQ composite, stocks above their 50, you can see is doing a little bit better than the S&P 500 at 52.44. So 52% of stocks in the NASDAQ composite are trading above their 50. So this is sort of a washout signal here, but we can see that we're putting in this nice cup on a short-term basis, a W pattern inside of a cup. But this is very short-term. This is only about 6 weeks of data. So typically you want to see a longer time span on a cup and handle. But NASDAQ was somewhat better. In particular, SMH and the semis were doing better last week. Looking at the VIX indicator, we can see that we didn't get up into this box area here that I was looking for. There really just wasn't that much fear. Sort of got the air taken out of it towards the end of the week, so we saw this little bit of a failure. So watch the VIX this week. If we see some fear jump back into the market, there is some volatility. If we jump back up and hit this 20 area, I'd be looking for a reversal at some point. But we don't have anything really here to trade off of, except for this possible head and shoulders that hasn't yet played out. Okay, so let's go ahead and run a scan. Okay, so we got a good list of stocks here. It should be above $5. Yeah, okay. So let's go ahead and put these in a chart list. Our focus group. Take a look at those. Let's take a look at them in a candle glance. This is typically what I do when I run my scans. I run this particular custom scan. Then I look at these charts and see what looks the best. Let me enable RSI. Alright, so we can see some stocks here that are trading above RSI, above 70, when the markets are doing a little bit better than the markets. E-House, we talked about Chinese stocks that were doing well since the 2005 period. This past few weeks we've seen some stocks, namely FENG, FENG, EJ, and a few other Chinese stocks that earnings were stellar compared to the last time, which was around 2005. So it's been a while. So let's just take a look at this. This is an inexpensive stock, EJ. We can see we had a nice move on the weekly. Let's take a look at the daily. Alright, you can see we had this nice flag going into the middle of the week we talked about. We were right at the 10 period EMA, and we had this nice blast off. Note the volume. Note on balance volume is cruising up. If we look at this on the weekly, I pointed this out midweek, that both the weekly and the daily have RSI above 70, and on balance volume was climbing. We noted the volume here, and that we were expecting new highs, or higher highs I should say, for the week. The monthly has yet to get up to 70, so that's showing that there's a possibility that we continue to move higher. Watch our on balance volume on the monthly as well. Note these two volume bars here. So we have the rest of the month of September to put in an even higher bar. Note that we're going to get a 10-30 period cross here. If you're in stocks like this, you want to make sure that your position is holding the 10-period EMA on the weekly. On FENG in particular, we had that as well. On the weekly, we're holding the 10-period, and RSI was really nice up here. On balance volume was cruising higher. If you look at the daily, you can see what we traded off of. You can see this flag pattern that we were trading off of. You had a box set up, we had a crossover here, crossover, and a nice wedge pattern here that played out off of the 30 period and 10 period. We have the 1618 up here at 1250. Let me change that real quick. This got off with the new data. So on the weekly, there is a Kirby level here as well as 1618 extension from this low here at $5.03 up to this high at $9.75. Okay, so we're above this Kirby level here. Some comments from the CEO and what FENG does in China. Note the volume bars. Dead giveaway that some things were about to happen on this stock, that institutions were accumulating this stock. They had a 30% increase year over year, significantly beating their guidance. And in particular, their outperformance was driven by a 169% year over year increase in mobile advertising, 42% increase in overall net advertising revenues. So these are the kind of things you have to look for if you're going to trade Chinese stocks in particular, or trading in general if you want to trade momentum. It's nice to see on balance volume continuing to cruise higher, confirming that bigger hands are getting into these positions on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. So let's take a look at some of the other stocks in this group. I was trading cores this week. We had a little bit of a shakeout on Friday, but we held the 10-period EMA, so no panic there. Note the box setup. We had a crossover here, box here, and if you follow me at all at theclosingprint.com, it's on the main page. This is a video here, a box setup explaining that and how you can use that in your trading. So let's take a look. Cores is doing quite nice, continuing to move higher. The thing that I noted was that on balance volume continued to move higher. We have these pocket pivots in volume. William O'Neill coined this phrase technically. This is when you have a burst in volume, or a green bar that exceeds the previous 10 days highest down volume day. All right, so you have a number of these along here. You can see that we held the 30 period, but you want to keep an eye on the 10 period. Okay, and an eye on your on balance volume. Looking at the monthly, so we had a nice IPO. Since the first IPO, this has been pretty much up for the most part, with some short-term moves lower and holding the 10 period here on the monthly chart. PRAA is something that Mikey is trading, Mike and Tammy 610. He had a nice little box trade set up. He actually was, I believe, holding this, or was it ACT? I forget. Anyway, so we had a box trade set up here. RSI bounced, and we have some nice volume following through on this. This is the IBD trade setup. So we have this double top to be watching coming into the week, and we have this Kirby volume up here. So if we can get above this level, it could be interesting. On balance volume is moving higher. Stochastics is overbought. And note PRAA to SPX relative strength looks really good. That's the daily. Let's look at the weekly. Weekly is approaching 70, so that looks good. We're holding the 10 period. This is really stellar looking stock. Really nice volume here, and on balance volume just continues to move higher as institutions continue to accumulate this particular stock. Exxon, Exxon. I guess this is a biotech stock. Trader Stewart and a few other people were trading this last week. I didn't trade it, but it looks good on the daily. Oh, this is an IPO. So typically what you want to watch for on the daily on an IPO, if it's an IPO that makes a high and then starts to retrace, what you want to do is you want to wait for your first close above the 4-period moving average for a buy trigger. So we have that here, and we can see that we moved off of that level since the last week of August. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That was Friday. So Thursday, Friday, you got a signal. Friday, you almost got shook out there. But then Monday, we turned that around, or Tuesday, we turned that around, and we started moving higher. So now we have a crossover of the 4 and the 10 period. So keep an eye on this stock. I'd like to get a move back down lower to trade this, but I'm not currently in it. ACT had a bit of a reversal candle on Friday. Mikey, keep an eye on this for a pullback to breakout. We had a nice base here, so I'm not sure why it did this last week, but watch the 10 period here and also on the weekly. We're still holding the 10 period, so nothing to be alarmed about per se. Okay? Alright, so let's take a look again at the focus group. We got a bunch of trades set up on that. Enable RSI. Cognizant. It's a decent company. Traded before, haven't traded that in a while. E-Trade. Finisar. Interesting. Look at the volume here. I'm finished, so I'm not sure what's going on there. Facebook, look at the volume, the RSI continuing to stay up here. Let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the daily. And note we're continuing to cruise higher, but look at the on-balance volume here. Continues to move higher. We got this big spike in volume. That was earnings. The day after earnings, I should say, because it came in after hours, right? We had a gap up, gap and go. We came back, tried to get back into a box trade setup, which we technically got, and you had a nice move higher off of that. So obviously no chasing here, but there's really nothing up here to trade against. We're above the Kirby levels, and long as on-balance volume continues to move higher, this is good. Institutions continuing to accumulate the stock. Let's look at the weekly. Same thing, on balance volume. Note the strength relative to the SPX. And we had a nice crossover here. And RSI continues to stay above 70. Let's look at the monthly. Obviously IPO, so it's not that. Let's go to 3 years. Obviously it doesn't go back that far. So here's 45 up here. The high the day of IPO. So we'll have that to deal with coming into the week. Note MGM here. Splunk, I think some people were trading that. I know it's traded. I see that a lot on StockTwits posted. The weekly looks really awesome. A daily RSI is up above 70, which you want to see. Accumulation, you have nice volume here. Note the pocket pivot exceeds all the volume in here for 2 months, so that's a good sign that institutions are picking this up, and we're continuing to trend again. On the weekly, holding the 10 period nicely. RSI is up above 70, and look at that accumulation, really nice on the on-balance volume. And the strength to the SPX. The monthly. On the monthly, you can see we had a nice first month in April of this IPO in 2012. We pretty much moved sideways, gyrating around, and then we broke out, and now we're continuing to move higher. Look at all of this volume and the accumulation that has occurred from the beginning of January or beginning of the year. Very nice. So that's Splunk. Alright, so we had this nice basing pattern. We dropped down, we regained that level, and we had a nice spike in volume, so that's decent as well. Let's look at the weekly. RSI is up here, and that's nice. Wow. 1, 2, 3 flags. Super move. On balance volume continues to move higher, so that's a good indication that institutions like BSX. Take a look at monthly. Wow. Look at that decline. Now, on a box trade setup, you can clearly see this crossover. This is a monthly from 2004, but look at how the 10 period held prices back, and even the 30 period. And then when we had this crossover, it's showing you a new trend has started. So this is phase 4. Okay, this is phase 1 where we see accumulation of shares. Now phase 2 is starting, so more than likely Boston Scientific over the next few years is going to continue to be accumulated. So that's nice. Phase 2 here, phase 3 a topping pattern, and then phase 4 brings us down to phase 1 where we start to see accumulation. The smart money. But we want to see on balance volume continue to move higher. Gigamon, not sure what they do. I think they're a Chinese stock, are they? Rentrack, Palo Alto Networks, looking pretty weak there. If you're looking for short stocks, India, maybe India is a new trend coming, SCIF. Let's take a look at SCIF. That's a nice long basing pattern here that we're breaking above. On balance volumes ticking up. Note the volume. Let's take a look at the weekly. RSI is pointing towards 70, so we can see a nice breakout here. Again, we're seeing the volume, so that's pushing, as well as the on balance volume moving higher. Don't know much about the company, so you want to do your research, find out when their earnings are, and what they can expect in terms of earnings potential going forward. The way I typically do that is I go to FinViz, and then I'll put in HI. You can see the pattern here. And look at return on assets 370, return on equity 1270. Book per share is $8.16. It's trading at 25. Forward PE is 11.97, and it's trading right at 24.39. Good yielding stocks, so keep an eye on those. It's trading 3.35% above its 50, and it's 20. That's a decent stock, something to keep an eye on. Okay, so that's going to do it for me today. Cousin Vinny coming to you from theclosingprint.com, as well as Day Trader Bootcamp. Come over and check us out. Hopefully this helped, and we'll see you in the room on Monday. Take care.